welcome to Head On here on Shaw TV. I'm your host, Hilary Eastmure. On this show, we take a closer look at some of the issues making news here on mid-Vancouver Island. The term political turmoil is one way to describe what the district of Lantzville is currently experiencing. 4 councillors resigned within about a month of each other after 2 top district staff members stepped down, including the chief administrative officer. Now there's a by-election scheduled to take place August the 8th, and a lingering sense of tension, confusion, and unease about what happened and what the next steps are for Lantzville. Today, I've invited Lantzville Mayor Colin Haime to join me on the show to hopefully get some answers and talk a little bit about what those next steps are. Thanks so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Colin, you were mayor from 2003 to 2011, and then you were re-elected in November. So this isn't your first rodeo, but these are unprecedented times for Lantzville. Would you agree?
Yeah, no doubt, not only for Lantzville, for virtually the province in certain cases. There have been situations where individual councillors have resigned or left because of illness and that sort of thing, but I don't believe that there's any precedent for a majority of council to resign.
You know, as much as I want to ask what happened, you know, that is kind of a broad question, and I know you can only offer your own perspective, but from where you sit, where and when did things sort of start going off the rails, and why?
Okay. In terms of any group of people, there's going to be disagreements that are going to occur. There are going to be situations where they have differences of opinion on issues. That wasn't the case specifically in this sort of a situation. Essentially what there was a memo from staff that made reference to what they called meeting decorum, and I have no issues at all with that memo itself. Certainly with the idea of bringing forward ideas and thoughts and impressions is something that's definitely worth it in any organization. Where things began to go off the rails is when individual councillors began to then use that and send that memo out to the general public. Not that it was something that needed to be hidden in any way, shape, or form, but basically what they did is they took something that should have been discussed at the council table and moved it out of that realm. Okay,
so you think that council should have had a chance to discuss that issue with decorum, you know, within council before it was spread to the general public?
Yeah, basically what happened was this memo came out, and then right after that I sent a memo to the senior staff asking them to provide council with the details of what concerned them. Subsequent to that, prior to any council meeting, effectively what ended up happening was individual councillors then began to send the memo, the staff memo, out to the general public with assorted what I would view as political statements.
So how did you get from there to councillors then deciding to resign?
Well, when they decide to resign, that's up to them. Okay, so the timing of that in that regard is something for them to answer. What happened after that was effectively the press, rightfully so, picked up on this story, and it created a variety of conflict in the public because we as a council had not even discussed this, and they were at the point where they were throwing out political accusations, etc. When it comes to the councillors that resigned, one of the strangest parts is one of the items that went out to the public was a letter by what constitutes a quorum of council, but it did not come from council. 4 council members sent out a letter to the public expressing their displeasure, and the strangest part is 4 councillors are majority. 4 councillors can set the direction. They can decide, for example, who they want to hire with regards to, say, a consultant or a facilitator. They can decide the direction to take on issues. And rather than doing that at the council table, they chose to do it in the public. From that standpoint there, then individual councillors began to resign because effectively the 4 that were expressing displeasure couldn't figure out a direction to go.
Okay, I have a comment here that I'd like you to respond to. Andrew Mostad was a councillor from 2011 to 2014. He did run for re-election, but missed out by about a margin of around 60 votes. And I should mention he is not running in the upcoming by-election. I asked him why he thinks the 4 councillors resigned, and he believes they were trying to make a point. Let's hear his clip here.
I think the point that they were trying to make was that this council was so dysfunctional and so toxic that they could no longer be a part of it with a clear conscience. they had to instead take their leave of this council rather than be associated with the bad behavior that's been happening.
What do you think about what he said?
Well, first off, the best way to affect change is effectively from the inside, not the outside. The second part is as individual members of council, we run an election to represent the people, to represent the 3,600 residents of Lantzville. And when it comes to those actions of representation, they occur at the council table. That's where decisions are made. They're not made out in the public themselves. Certainly we take input from the public, but the decision happens as a result of a vote of council. By individuals saying it's so toxic, I need to resign, when that group makes up a majority, so they effectively could set the direction itself, is what's bizarre about these circumstances. The 3 remaining councillors, we're fulfilling our responsibility to the residents by working to take care of the residents' business. And so the individuals, if it was a case that there was one person that resigned, one person cannot set the direction. I can't set the direction as mayor, an individual councillor can't set the direction as mayor. If it was one person, I could understand Mr. Mostad's comments. But for a majority to say, we're going to make a point by going home, that doesn't serve the residents of Lantzville.
What do you think he means when he's talking about bad behavior?
Well, you know, with regards to the claims, for example, in a variety of documents, the memo by the 4 councillors to the public, emails from individual councillors, resignation letters of individual councillors, there's references, for example, to angry, red-faced men yelling uncontrollably at staff. Well, in that respect there, the meetings of council are up on YouTube. Individual residents have gone through it and they go, well, where are the angry red-faced men that in this case Councillor Niegrave made reference to? They don't exist.
Were there interactions between council members and staff that took place outside of those actual council meetings that perhaps people did not see but councillors were aware of?
No. No, there have been no instances of yelling, angry, red-faced men. There was even a reference to violence in an email.
Or threats of violence?
No, it was actual violence.
Wow.
That is completely erroneous. Did not occur. And that one of the things with regards to these reasons and excuses is they morphed. They went originally from the idea of bullying and harassment to suddenly it was angry, red-faced men, to all of a sudden it was violent, etc. And then Councillor Savage in one of the local papers made reference to, well, there was no one big blow-up that created this. It was a slow erosion of trust, is the words he used. So those 4 individuals don't have the same excuse, reasons, whatever, as to why they resigned. But like I said, from the standpoint of council, we've got 3 individuals that are willing to continue with the community. The individuals have the right to run on August the 8th, and we look forward to it.
It can certainly get tense, though, around the council table, and, you know, there are differences of opinion, and, you know, people can take things personally, and it does get heated.
Well, and if that was the case, if there had been cases of yelling and that, which I've seen at other council tables and on TV and things like that, there's none of that. That's not the way I do business. That's not the way I allow people to do business in the council room.
Or even that slow erosion, sort of the undermining of people's opinions. You don't think any of that sort of happened?
People are more than welcome to express their opinions. Effectively what happens is it's one person, one vote. And so when it comes to the direction of council, it's established by that difference of opinions where you discuss it, you have difference of opinions, you vote. If you don't like the outcome, that's not the fault of any individual, it's the fault of the majority, but it's the majority that rules in that case there.
You know, this is obviously a tough situation. It's put Lantzville in the spotlight in a way that, you know, you probably wouldn't prefer. When I was in Lantzville speaking to residents, I heard from quite a few people who said, you know, it's frankly embarrassing, but beyond that, it raises important questions about, you know, Lantzville's future. I have another clip here from former councillor Andrew Mostad, and I think it sums up some of those questions and concerns pretty well.
For sure, it's damaged Lantzville's reputation. We are, I believe, the first council that has actually had the ministry step in to take part in running Lantzville. So this really brings into question whether or not Lantzville is even mature enough to have our own governance, to have our own council. There's definitely been people in the community that keep thinking that maybe we should just amalgamate with Lent or with Nanaimo. Maybe we should just go back to the old style of just having one seat at the RDN council. It really calls into question whether or not we can actually do this.
What do you think about what Andrew had to say?
Well, back in 2002, we had a vote on whether or not to incorporate. Some of the things that were looked at in that incorporation study included the possibility of amalgamation with Nanaimo. When we did incorporate, it was because of some very specific issues. So, for example, the regional district was looking at potentially putting a landfill in the hills in behind Lantzville. The regional district was on the edge of approving a project in the village core that the residents of Lantzville disagreed with. And as a result, that led to the incorporation study. So it's very easy to look at the other possibilities and say, well, the grass is greener over there. Certainly one of the big positives would be the saving in administration costs. So from a taxation aspect, the amalgamation with Nanaimo might possibly make sense. But then there's the consideration of where do Lantzville residents want the community to go? And the ability to govern, or the ability for Lantzville to run its own affairs, one of the biggest challenges over the last number of years is that people have argued about people. They haven't argued about the issues. They haven't discussed the issues. So for example, in this case here, if it was a case of difference of opinion as to the direction of an OCP, that's what we should be talking about. It shouldn't be about the people. But there's a certain element where they've taken it to where it's all about the person. Let's attack the person. And that's what Lantzville itself has got to get away from.
Do you think that this situation has irreparably damaged the district's reputation?
Well, it certainly affects it on a provincial stage. The Inspector of Municipalities, first of all, is not running Lantzville. The Inspector of Municipalities was consulted with the aspect of determining what quorum is, recognizing that we had lost that fourth individual. Did meet with the Inspector of Municipality last week. They did basically a site visit to stop by and meet us because they had never met us before. And at the time, there's no concerns in that regard. When it comes to the image or the reputation of Lantzville itself, where I get concerned are things like infrastructure grants. So you have, for example, going back to some of the correspondence that's been spread around the community where people say, this is going on and it's going to ruin our reputation. And what do? They spread it out amongst the whole community, which of course then it becomes news and affects the reputation. I think what it is it goes back to the take care of the business of the district, take care of the issues in the district. Again, get away from the people.
Okay. Do you think that there, has this exposed a major flaw in the district that, that points to the fact that, perhaps incorporation was a mistake?
It's certainly a bump in the road, no doubt about that fact. Some of the things, for example, for incorporation, right after incorporation, it gave us the ability to apply for infrastructure grants. We could not do that as being part of the RDN, although let me change that. We could do it, but we'd be in the RDN queue. We wouldn't be in our own queue. So for example, right before we incorporated, we, through the RDN, applied for an infrastructure grant for a reservoir, about $1.4 million, if I recall. Because we incorporated, we were able to reorder the priority and make that Lantzville's #1 priority instead of like the regional district's #6 priority. And so as a result, we got that grant for that infrastructure. Same thing with Phase 1 sewer, Phase 2 sewer. Now we've applied for a grant for Phase 3 sewer. Hopefully we'll get it. Certainly the turmoil created by the resignation of councillors could possibly theoretically affect the eligibility, or not the eligibility, but the possible success of that.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss where Lantzville goes from here. Welcome back to Head On here on Shaw TV, examining the issues that really matter here on mid-Vancouver Island. I'm your host, Hilary Eastmure, joined today by Lantzville Mayor Colin Haime. We're talking about some of the challenges the district is currently facing. So you've got a by-election coming up, but in the meantime, Coralie Oakes, the Minister of Community Sport and Cultural Development, says that she and the Inspector of Municipalities will be keeping a close eye on Lantzville. In her letter saying that you could continue for now with just 3 councillors and that could constitute quorum for now, Oakes says she expects the vacant staff positions to be filled as quickly as possible. How's that going?
Well, we've got an interim chief administrative officer. We'd actually interviewed him as a council prior to the last 2 resignations. He started work last week. Mr. Jim Dias, a 19-year veteran from the District of North Cowichan. Very nice man, really easy to work with over the past 2 weeks here, so that position's filled. There was a second staff position, which was the Director of Finance. We had a discussion with the Inspector of Municipalities as to what our approach would be in that regard, recognizing that that individual has to work very, very closely with the Chief Administrative Officer. For the permanent posting, what we proposed to them is when we put in place a permanent CAO, they would then hire the Director of Finance. In the meantime, we have another individual as an interim Director of Finance. His name is Doug Lang. He's actually done work for the district a number of times before, and he started last week as well.
And when do you expect to make that CAO position permanent?
Basically, it's a case where we'd already done the advertising for it, we'd already received the resumes, and we were going through the resumes for the short list and identifying the individuals that we wish to interview at this time.
Okay. Oakes goes on to say in that letter that there's, quote, an expectation council will establish procedures and policies to ensure positive council and staff relations and to have mechanisms in place to deal with issues or disputes as they arise. And that council will obtain independent professional assistance to fully understand the issues and find mutually acceptable ways to solve those problems. Is this happening?
Yeah. Well, first off, dealing with the policy side of things, there were suggestions of bullying and harassment of which no specifics were ever provided, and as I said, the excuse seemed to change over time.
Still, those allegations are there, and it's important to address them.
No, and I don't dispute that at all. And with regards to that, there is a policy in place on how to deal with that, on how that should be dealt with. And the 4 council members, by going outside the council table with what they did, actually does not match up with that policy. And so in that regard there, one of the first things is making all the staff aware of what that policy is and the procedures to take place with that policy. Now, going beyond that, there's still relationship issues that can occur and those sorts of things. And so we would be looking into ways to try and identify those things prior to them becoming a bigger issue.
Okay, but do you think that those procedures and policies need to be updated in light of what's happened?
Well, the policies and procedures with regards to bullying and harassment were only passed by council last year. It was the previous council that passed those. July of 2014, I believe that those were passed. In that regard there, they apply both to council members as well as staff. And as I said, they were not followed in that regard. With regards to additional policies, recognizing that we will have 4 new council members as well as a couple new permanent staff members, I would look for that collective group to identify those policies and procedures that allow us to move forward.
And in terms of obtaining independent professional assistance, that seems like a key part of what she's asking Lantzville to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a recognition here, for example, that nobody on council or even our staff, we don't have an HR person, that sort of an aspect. And so when it comes to dealing with some of those personnel and HR issues, utilizing outside individuals is the way to go in that regard. Because of this specific issue, it became a bit thorny because there were people making supposed accusations against other individuals, and trying to identify somebody that could deal with all those interpersonal aspects was very, very difficult. But moving forward, which is effectively what staff wants to do at this point and council, or remaining council wants to do at this point, again, bringing in an individual to identify the processes, identify roles, responsibilities, that sort of thing.
So you are looking for someone to do that?
There's not currently a search, recognizing again the low number of individuals, but it's something that would be moving forward as soon as we get to a full complement again.
Okay. I know that you are keen to continue with the business of council, though, even though you just have 3 members. It is quorum. So I have a question about the Village Core Improvement Plan. A committee with former councillor Jennifer Milbank at the helm spent the last year developing a detailed plan for the Village Core. I think this was meant to draw more people downtown and sort of make the downtown more vibrant in a number of different ways. And the process included public consultations and input sessions. After all that, is it true that you and the 2 remaining councillors have decided not to use the resulting report?
No, it's not true. Not true at all. During the strategic planning session that the previous council, or the larger council, did, the Village Core Plan was one of the items that was on the topics to be discussed. First off, when it comes to the strategic plan and the inclusion of the strategic plan, it's a vote of council. Myself and Councillor Haime declared a conflict and in fact did not participate in the vote related to it.
And when did that vote take place?
April 13th, I believe. April 13th. April 13th. At that time, there was still a full council.
Okay.
However, one councillor was away for that meeting, and that was Councillor Niegrave. The remaining councillors, which would have left the 4 individuals, Councillor Milbank, Councillor Savage, Councillor Scott, and Councillor Colson, voted at that meeting to not include this Village Core Plan in the strategic plan until such time as the full council had reviewed the draft plan. The plan itself was still draft at that time. The implications to that is if it's not in the strategic plan, it's not in the budget. And so those 4 councillors, and because I was not in the room, I have no idea who voted which way, but it was those 4 councillors that voted to not include it in the strategic plan.
So the plan is sort of in limbo at this point? Like, there's still a chance or the very real possibility you're going to re-examine it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with regards to a Village Core Plan of some sort, it is something that the village needs. There needs to be some direction. There's possibility of developers working within the Village Core, so there needs to be some direction in that respect, so they know which way to go with their development. When council goes to pick that up and do that is up to council. And with regards to myself and Councillor Haime stepping out because of potential conflict, we'd been given verbal advice from our lawyer that we weren't in conflict, but we were not comfortable with that prior to getting written advice. So unless we've got that written advice, it would be the remaining 5 councillors that make that decision.
Okay, because it seems like it would be a shame if all of that work went to waste.
Yeah, now one of the other parts to remember is it's a long-term plan. It's not something that you don't revitalize a village, as Nanaimo would know, you don't revitalize a downtown in a 6-month period. And so it'll be slow incremental changes that occur in that regard. And so the fact that the Village Core Plan wasn't in the strategic plan initially for this council, it unto itself does not kill that plan in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. And I think all of this sort of begs the question, do you feel like you still have a mandate from residents? I mean, more than half of council has resigned. Do you think it's really okay for three people to be making key decisions about Lantzville's future, especially with a by-election less than 2 months away? Actually,
a really strange part about this is last November, the Lantzville residents voted to reduce the council size with the next election.
From 7 to 5.
From 7 to 5 in 2018. In 2018, it will be 3 people effectively making the decisions for the community because with a council of 5, a majority is 3. So you run into essentially the same idea. But having said that, yeah, right now we are at a council of 7, technically. The minister has allowed us this leeway here because of the circumstances in that regard. The fact that those 4 individuals chose to resign was an individual decision for each of themselves. From the aspect of the 3 individuals that are still on council, our role, our mandate is to look after the business of the district, and we intend to continue to do that.
Okay, I have a final clip here from former councillor Andrew Mostad. I'd like you to hear his thoughts on how he feels the by-election should play out. And I should say this: he's not alone in thinking this is something I heard from quite a few people.
I do think it should go back from scratch. I don't think the 3 councillors that are left should remain. I think instead that they should seek another mandate to come back. I think this last election, the last 6 months, really threw a bright light on who some of these people are, and I think Lantzville will choose differently now that they've seen what these people do when they're in power.
Okay. With regards to Mr. Mostad, that's his opinion, and he's welcome to having his own opinion. Yep.
Are you confident in the leadership that you've shown in Lantzville, especially in light of this, this recent turmoil?
Well, a couple things about leadership. First off, if you have the group of individuals who are free to act as they wish in that respect, there's only so much you can do to lead a group that doesn't want to be led. And so when it comes to that consideration, like I said, it's done at the council table. It's done based on votes. Everybody has had the opportunity to make motions as they see fit. Everybody's had the opportunity to vote as they see fit. They've never been denied offering their opinion or anything of that nature. And so from the standpoint of the individuals themselves, the fact that we're only 3 at council wasn't a result of a choice of the 3 that are there. It was a result of a choice of the 4 that are gone.
But I mean, like, are you confident in the leadership that you've shown? Like, this has been a real challenge for Lantzville. It's been a tough time. Yep. Do you think that you've gotten ahead of this issue and made residents aware that they should still feel confident in your leadership? Like, yeah. If you were to run again in August, like, theoretically, do you think that you would be reelected?
Most definitely. And when it comes to the standpoint of what Mr. Mostad, for example, knows about what went on, I mean, effectively, Mr. Mostad hasn't been in any meetings. But
it's not about him. It's more about the residents in general.
That a number of residents expressed.
Yeah.
The fact remains that the individuals themselves didn't provide any specifics with regards to things. It's about, when I got elected on the idea of taking care of the important issues of the district. The water agreement, of which Councillor Mostad was part of the council that signed that water agreement. The water agreement only allows new water, to go to, in 50 units a year, to new development.
Yeah, the water agreement was certainly something that you campaigned hard on.
Yeah. And that's still important. It still hasn't been dealt with. The idea of sewer. We've moved ahead with the application for a grant for Phase 3 sewer, just like we did during my terms for Phase 1 and Phase 2 sewer. When it comes to the finances, we've looked deeper at the finances than any other council before. And there are places that we can save, because that's another thing that I ran on in terms of the financial side of things and cutting those amounts. So in terms of where the council's going and where the community's going, it still has the same direction.
And what is your strategy when it comes to moving forward with a new council and repairing relationships with the community? I know the last time you were on this show, right after you were elected in November, you talked about the idea of transparency. Yep. And public engagement and rebuilding trust. Are those still priorities? Well,
and not only that, it's something that we've been doing. For example, the recording of meetings itself was something instituted or an initiative by Councillor Colson that provided access to the people to those council meetings. We've held our first town hall meeting that had over 200 people come with regards to the Foothills project. And those are initiatives that we intend to continue with the support of the council members that come on board. The other thing that we're still working on, because we haven't got a report from staff, is the release of in-camera information. And when it comes to that consideration, there's significant amounts of in-camera information that I believe that the residents should be able to see and understand.
And that's what you're talking about with transparency.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
No, well, yes, there is one. From my standpoint, I'm looking forward to a new council, a group of people where they're committed to the issues and that they want to move forward collectively as a group. A number of people have picked up nomination packages already, a number of people that I'd never seen involved before. So if there's any good to come about it, it brings out some people that are really interested in moving the community forward.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me, Colin.
You're welcome.
This has been another edition of Head On here on Shaw TV. Thanks for watching.